Hi, I'm Tanya Hillis with Hospice Savannah's Edel Caregiver Institute, and I am here today with my friend, Robert Etheridge. He is actually an advanced planning specialist with the Baker McCullough Funeral Home, and he's going to talk to us today about a topic that really interested me when he was talking to me about this several months ago, actually, and he was talking about when someone dies, that within the first 24 hours, there are about 100 things that you need to do within those first 24 hours. And so he's going to talk with us a little bit about that today, because many of those things can be done actually before the time of someone's passing. Robert, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Robert Etheridge, like she said. I work with Baker McCullough Funeral Homes. I am the advanced planning specialist. A little bit about myself is I used to work actually here with the American Hospice Equipment Company, and we contracted with Hospice Savannah. That's how I got my introduction into all of this, and I used to go out and deliver medical equipment to individuals on hospice care. That moved me on to becoming a branch manager with a local home care company where I served about 200 individuals on a daily basis and managed hundreds of employees and admin staff at that time. One of the biggest things I want to talk to you about today is just planning ahead in advance prior to someone passing away or prior to yourself passing away, all those things that you can take care of in advance. Most people don't realize that when you sit down with an individual, the funeral planner or funeral director is going to ask you a lot of vital information and background information on yourself or your deceased family member. It's a lot easier to go ahead and get that information done in advance, because at a time of grief, it can be really difficult to remember your mother's grandfather's middle name or your mother's grandmother's maiden and middle name, and the school they went to and graduated from and their level of education, or their birthplace. I know where my dad was born, I think. I kind of know what my mom's, real name is, but even when we sat down and did hers, she actually didn't know her legal name, so we had to go back and change it once we behind it. So there's a lot of information you can get done in advance. With that being said, I'll just kind of move on about some of the values of advanced planning. When you advance plan, it allows you to record your own unique wishes. Everyone has an idea of what they would like when they pass away or when a family member passes away, but this is a perfect opportunity for you to tell your story on how you would like to be remembered. You can design your own special services, whether it be a burial or a cremation, whether you want to do something traditional or unique. This is your opportunity to speak up and go, hey, I want to be memorialized with this wonderful party on the beach. Absolutely, we can make that happen for you. It helps you make informed, thoughtful decisions. A lot of times people have this idea of what they would like, and then they realize how much it would cost and all the effort that would go into it, and they may still go for that, or they may change their mind to something a little bit simpler because their budget does not allow for that. So knowing some of those prices and costs is a big deal and helps individuals make thoughtful decisions, which will help people prevent, I think maybe my next slide, grief spending. But also by planning in advance, it releases stress, anxiety, confusion for your loved ones. When you pass away, it's a difficult time for your family. A lot of times they don't know your wishes because a lot of people are afraid to talk about death. A lot of people are afraid to even acknowledge that at some point in time that they're going to pass away. So it makes it more difficult on the family if you haven't sat down and had this conversation. But at least sitting down with someone like myself or another funeral professional and telling them what they want, it goes a long way in relieving the stress on your family. It also, we don't all come from the perfect family. Some of us have unique family situations at home. And even the best families, you can run into the risk of bickering and uncertainty and unnecessary worry and additional grief because individuals don't plan ahead. Also, with a funeral or cremation, if you plan in advance, you also have the opportunity to do what's called a pre-funded or a pre-need funeral policy. Pre-funded arrangements are exempt from Medicaid qualification and estate recovery, and I want to touch on that a bit. If for some reason you really start to live a nice long life and something happens to you, say as a stroke, and that you're going to need to be in a long-term care facility because you no longer can stay at home independently. Many times Medicare will cover part of it, but at some point in time you may have to apply for Medicaid. Well, to do that, your assets have to be below a certain level, and they will require you to do what's called a Medicaid spend down. You can do a Medicaid spend down by purchasing or pre-planning your funeral and your burial plots. I believe you can have up to $10,000 in a prepaid funeral fund as long as it's itemized and irrevocable to a funeral home, and you can do the same thing with the burial plot as well. All right, a prepaid funeral and cremation protects you against the effects of inflation by transferring that risk to the funeral home. So if you do plan your funeral and you decide to pre-fund it through the funeral home, it locks in that cost at today's rate. All right, different than using your insurance policy for it, which will just, be the cost of whatever day it was the funeral is at the time of your death. But you can lock in that rate so you can pay today's price for that. And one of the nice things about that, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but with the insurance policy, if you pass away at a certain time, you'll be 100% covered regardless of how much you've paid into it, depending on the policy that you have. A lot of people ask, is it transferable? Yeah, funeral arrangements can be transferred across the country. So if you're worried about moving, we'll take care of that for you. You can transfer it to any funeral home in the country. All right. A lot of people don't understand all the different costs that go along with planning a funeral. So I'm going to be real simple here, and I'm going to kind of break it down into 3 different sections. The funeral home cost, so what you can expect to pay at a funeral home. Cemetery cost, what you can expect to pay at a cemetery. And then your third-party cost. Those are items that are not really provided by the funeral home or the cemetery. In some cases, they can be purchased at one or the other or both, but most cemeteries and funeral plans are broken down into these 3 categories. So I want to go over those costs so you would kind of know what to expect when we sit down together. So the first one is funeral home cost. All right. One of the first costs that you're going to come across are the services for the funeral home, for the burial or cremation, including, the funeral or the memorial. You're going to have merchandise at the funeral home, and that would be such as a casket or any memorabilia or anything like that. And the third part of the funeral home cost are going to be cash advances. These are items that we will arrange for you to have at a service, and you would pay us, and then we would pay that third party. And I'll break all those down here in a second for all of you. All right. First costs are the funeral home professional services. And what are those? So the professional services of the funeral home staff. Okay, what does that mean? Those are the funeral director, all the other individuals that work at the funeral home that make sure that all the forms are processed so you can go on with either the cremation or the burial. It arranges and coordinates with the cemetery. It just goes on and on. All those behind-the-scene things that you don't see when you come in, the funeral, those are those costs. So those are the funeral home professional services for the staff, and that you'll see that charge there. The next charge that you may see, and this is an optional, and I'll go into that a little bit, but is embalming. All right, embalming is not required by law. Now, most funeral homes will have a policy that will require embalming if you have a viewing open to the public, okay? So if cost is a factor and you're trying to really keep costs down, you can have a service with a closed casket without the embalming, so you may not have to be charged for that. However, if you're going to do a public viewing, most funeral homes will have a policy stating that because you're doing the open casket, you need to be embalmed. All right, some other fees that you may come across are dressing and casketing of the deceased, or if it's a closed casket, bathing and sanitation of the deceased, okay? If you're going for a cremation, there'll be a fee for the cremation itself too. All right, other professional services, a visitation, all right? Many times, funeral homes will have a visitation, and traditionally they would have a visitation the night before and then the service the day of. So the visitation would be a fee for itself, and then you would have a separate fee for the funeral ceremony or the memorial service if it's a cremation. And then any other uses of the facility and staff. Say if you wanted to have a catered dinner following the service, there would be a fee for that too, for the use of the facility. All right. Other funeral home, in this funeral home professional services, when you pass away, whether it is at hospice or a hospital or your home or a nursing home, there is a fee to transfer the remains of the deceased to the funeral home itself. We may go to the hospital, we may go to the coroner, we may come to hospice house, your home, the nursing home, but there is a fee for that. So that is a fee that you will see. If you were doing a traditional burial or a graveside service or a service at a church, there will be a fee for a hearse or what is called now a funeral vehicle. You would also may have a fee for a limousine or any family cars. That is something that depends on your background and your belief system and your values, if that's important to you, but those options are there for you. You'll also need a lead car if you're going to have a funeral procession to a cemetery, and then you may see a charge for a service vehicle. That is the new term for a flower car. So are all fees and services and types of cars that you may see come across your bill in your contract at an at-need service. These are all things that we can all take care of and get arranged in a pre-need too. The last professional home service or funeral home professional service that you may come across is forwarding or receiving of remains. Not all of us pass away at home. Sometimes people pass away in other cities and we have to ship the individual to their hometown or receive them from out of town. So you may see a service for that as well too, okay? All right. Funeral home merchandise. So I have brought some stuff with me here too to show you as I get to them, but a casket, okay? If you're going to be buried, you are going to need a casket. Caskets, the cost vary widely depending on the material, if it's wood, if it's metal. If you're going for a metal casket, make sure that you get a casket that is considered gasketed. The best way to describe what gasketing means is to think of your refrigerator, that seal that kind of goes around it. A metal casket, a good quality metal casket will be gasketed. So that is something to look for when you're looking for a casket. Wood is beautiful. Wood has, some beautiful grains. They can be simple. They can be, expensive. It just really depends on what you decide that you want. However, with a wooden casket, if you have pre-bought a mausoleum space, a lot of cemeteries will not allow you to have a wooden casket in a cemetery. So that is something, or in a mausoleum at a cemetery. So that is something to think about, okay? With caskets, you can go from very, very simple to very, very high end. We have one at the showroom that's copper. It's beautiful, but it's also $7,000. If that's what you want, we have one. But a lot of times casket can help tell your story or the story of your loved ones by adding some memorabilia or little medallions or items such as this wonderful little medallion here. It says "Going Home." It's magnetic. It goes inside the casket itself, or one here, sorry if that's loud, for United States Air Force. Beautiful medallion. These would go inside, and the casket and removed before the casket is closed and then given to the family members after the funeral, and they can keep them. One of the other ones that I really, really like is the cross. It can go inside the casket. It's very simple. It's very clean, but it's also got the hanging hook here, space to that, so you can hang it on your wall in a place where you can always go back to and look and think of your loved one if you don't have the time to get to a cemetery. So that's great ways to remember your loved ones with a casket. Urns. A lot of times I get questions like, what does the basic urn? If I don't want to urn, I'm going to be scattered in the mountains, and I don't know when they're going to do that. What does the basic urn look like? This is it. Nothing fancy. It is black plastic. Just opens up, and the remains would go inside in a zip-tied bag, and it would be sealed, and you could travel anywhere in the world with it with the proper documentation. But it would fit in your carry-on. But this is what the basic urn looks like if you don't upgrade to a more expensive one. But with urns, there are also some keepsake urns that you can purchase or buy for your loved ones to have after you're gone. One of my personal favorites is this picture frame. Believe it or not, this is an urn. It holds a small amount of your ashes, so at the time of the death, the funeral director would split a little bit off and give this to you. You could put a wonderful picture of your family member here, and it could sit in your living room, and no one would really know that this would be, one of your family members, and they wouldn't go, "Oh my God!" But a nice way for them to remember your family and have them with you always. Whether you're buried or cremated, there are other keepsake items that are out there too. One of my personal favorites is the legacy jewelry item. This is a pendant. I don't know if you can see it, but it has a fingerprint on one side, and then on the other side it reads, "Mom, you will always be with me in my heart." So they vary different in cost depending on the material, the metal that you choose. So inexpensive to expensive, beautiful, simple way for you to remember your loved one. And that's actually one of their fingerprints that is unique to your loved one or yourself for your loved ones that you can use. All right. Some of the things that you can buy at a funeral home besides that, you may want to purchase your vault or a grave liner when you do your pre-need at a funeral home. You can also buy them at a cemetery as well. But if you buy them wherever, regardless of where you buy them, I want to go into a few details about a vault and a grave liner. A vault is a sealed outer burial container that will prevent grave collapsing in on itself. But it's also sealed, so it's going to keep the natural elements such as water and bugs out of and away from your casket. A grave liner is going to be an unlined concrete box that is still going to allow the natural elements in. It's just going to prevent grave collapsing. So that is one of those things that what is of value to you? What do you perceive? And what are your, beliefs in culturally, what do you feel is of value to you on which choices to make there? And there's a big cost difference between those two. All right. Third-party costs. These are items that the funeral home or the cemetery have absolutely no control over. All right. They will help you get them. They may advance you the money to get them, and then you get reimbursed the funeral home, or you may go to a third party and pay for it directly. But these are all items that the funeral home or the cemetery have absolutely no control of the cost, but you're going to need. The most important and the first thing on that list are death certificates. Okay, death certificates currently in the state of Georgia are $25 for the first one, and then $5 for each additional death certificate after that. So say you order 6, but you need 8. Well, you're going to start over at $25 and then $5 again. So make sure you always have enough death certificates. and go with that. All right. An honorarium. That is the money that you are going to give to the individual, the pastor, the clergy that actually officiates your service, okay, or your family member's service. They don't do it for free. Now, you may have a family member or a person in your church that will do it for free, but usually they like some sort of donation or money. Today is going to be $150 to $200 that you can plan on even giving to the pastor or donating to the church. Obituaries and death announcements. All right, so there's a big difference between the two. A death announcement says, he lived, he passed away. Baker McCullough Funeral Home is going to be handling the arrangements, and it'll direct individuals to the Baker McCullough website for the rest of his arrangements. An obituary, we all kind of know what an obituary is. It's the long, tells the story of that individual's life. Currently, obituaries run about 300 to 400 to 500 and up to 600, depending on how long the obituary is, here locally in the Savannah Morning newspaper. So that's something that you need to look at and plan for if you would like to have a long obituary or just an obituary in the paper, okay? So that's that cost. Flowers. You're going to need flowers. Unless you're military and you want a flag draped over your casket, you're probably going to need a casket spray. Those vary widely in cost too, depending on who the florist is, as well as what type of flowers you have in your casket or on your casket. All roses, obviously, are going to cost more than the spring mix with a lot of greenery and carnations, okay? But you can expect to spend anywhere from $300 to $500 currently on a casket spray. All right. A lot of people like to have music at their funeral. Sometimes, and it's very common for someone to have downloaded music with technology and play on the computer and through the sound system, and that's absolutely fine. But sometimes you may want to have someone play an organ or a harp or a band that come in and play your favorite music that you really liked. That may or may not come with a fee too. So that is something that you may, if you want to have a harpist play at your funeral, that you may have to pay for. Memorial cards and guest book. Now, the funeral home may have a package where they do them there in-house. However, you may have been to a funeral at some point in time that the funeral binder or the memorial cards look almost like a football game brochure, and that's perfectly fine. But you may have to go to a third party to get that printed for you. So that may be a third party cost that you may have as well. Clothing, okay? What are you going to be buried in? Sometimes if someone has gone through a long illness, none of their clothes may fit them like they used to, or they may have gained weight and they may not be able to get the jacket on. So you may have to buy clothing for the individual for the burial and the viewing. So that's something to think about. Escorts. A police escort, depending on where you live, may not be free. You may have to pay for that. Some communities may do it for free, some may not, okay? Monument marking or engraving. Your monument, depending on what material you use, the cost can vary widely. However, say you were the second member of your family to die, your spouse has already died, and your name is already on the marker. So your family can expect to pay what's called a scrolling fee, where the monument company would come back out and put the date of death on your monument marker. So that may be a fee that you come across, okay? Opening and closing of the grave, all right? Depending on the cemetery will depend on what the opening and closing costs are, but you can expect, with the grave setup and the tents and chairs and the opening and closing, to spend at least at a minimum $1,000 up to $2,000 depending on the cemetery and depending on the location of where you're at too. All right, cemetery cost. Now, everything that I've talked about so far, I can help you arrange in a pre-need, Okay, all of those costs we can sit down, we can put down on paper, and I can give you a good guess of what it's going to cost you. And then you have the ability to lock in that cost and go ahead and lock it in and get it paid for, so no family member is going to have to worry about that at the time of your death. But I want to go into possible cemetery cost real quick too, so you know that you would have to reach out to a second person at a cemetery to arrange to pay for these, okay? If you're going to be buried, you're going to need either a plot, a lawn crypt, a mausoleum. If you're going to be cremated, a niche or a columbarium if you choose to be placed at a cemetery, okay? I've already talked about the vault and the grave liner and the difference between the two of them, okay? That is something that you can buy at the cemetery as well as the funeral home, okay? The lowering device. Somehow the casket's got to get from here to here. It doesn't come for free. I think it's about $350 locally for the lowering device here in Savannah. Also administration fees. There may be an administration fee at the cemetery to process the paperwork with the state to let the individuals know that you were buried in a certain location, but there'll be administration fees too. Cemetery cost, okay? Location, 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 location. Whether, here in Savannah, we're on the water, we have some very picturesque cemeteries. The closer you are to the water, the more expensive that plot's gonna be. Even within the same cemetery, they have sections that are more expensive than others. So location, location, location. A city cemetery, here in Savannah, we have Bonaventure, which I believe is all sold out, so the only way you're going to be buried there is if you have a family plot. But there's also Greenwich and Laurel Grove. Private, you have the Savannah family of cemeteries, which is going to be Forest Lawn, Hillcrest East and Hillcrest West, Magnolia, and then Westside Gardens out in Bloomingdale. All right. You also have family cemeteries, church cemeteries, and this is important, a veteran cemetery. Locally here, we have Glenville, just on the other side of Hinesville, and then we have Beaufort Memorial. Now, if you are a veteran and you qualify for military honors, you can also be buried with your spouse for no charge at a veteran cemetery. It's always good to know, and you can save a lot of money that way if you choose to. City cemetery. The requirements at a city cemetery for outer burial containers and vaults may not exist depending on the city. And one of the reasons is because certain religions have very specific burial guidelines that they have to offer to everyone being buried, and the cemetery can't discriminate against one religion to the other. So you may have the ability to be buried in a city cemetery without a grave liner or a vault. All right. Burial versus cremation. This is a big trend here in the United States. So you see a lot of people moving towards cremation, and last year, the year before, was the first time in American history where cremations outnumbered burials. Now, here in the South, burials still outnumber cremations, but it's rapidly changing. Pacific Northwest, about 95% of the individuals are cremated versus burials at 5%. Geography may also play a big part in that too. Currently, if you passed away, say in Wisconsin and Michigan, where there's probably 20 feet of snow on the ground right at the moment, being buried next week is gonna probably be difficult. So a lot of individuals may opt for cremation because of that. In those northern states, they have to wait for the ground to thaw before they can even do any burials there. So a lot of people lean towards cremation in those areas. Personal wants and wishes always plays a big part with when someone is going to be buried or cremated. But the biggest one, the biggest two actually, are financial, but your religious and cultural beliefs, all right? Here being in the South, a lot of us are very, very pro-burial, and that is absolutely 100% fine if that is your belief and that is your culture and that is your family history. However, there is a huge population here in the Savannah area whose religion is towards cremation. They have a special ceremony that goes with it. It's quite beautiful to watch, but different religions, different backgrounds, different cultures may dictate whether you are cremated or buried. All right, and then financial. There is a huge cost difference between a cremation and a burial. If you're going to have to go take a loan out to meet someone's needs, you may want to look at cremation versus a burial if they don't have any strong religious beliefs or cultural beliefs towards that too. All right. Let's see. I'm kind of zipping through here. Veterans benefits. So Savannah is a military city. We have an Air Force here at one time before Hunter changed to Army. We have Beaufort Memorial National Cemetery in Beaufort. We have Glenville, which is just down on the other side of Hinesville. We have Fort Stewart, Hunter. We have Paris Island right there. So we have a lot of military around us. So a lot of people choose to retire here in Savannah that have served in those military bases. But I want to kind of go over a military cemetery, so Beaufort or Glenville. If you qualify, so meaning you've been honorably discharged and you have a good DD 214, and if you're in the military, you know what that is. All right, you can be buried in a national cemetery. You and your spouse can be buried together. You get an assigned grave site. Your opening and closing cost of the grave are covered. Your grave liner for casketed remains, that is paid for. You get a marker, that is paid for. Perpetual care, that is cared for. And like I said, your spouse can be buried with you at a military cemetery if you have a good DD 214 that says you are honorably discharged. And that can save you up to $10,000 in some cases, if not more. Military benefits. A lot of people are unaware, just like you get a Social Security benefit if your spouse passes away, a wonderful $255. It's a great meal out, but you also get some military benefits. You'll get military honors at your funeral, which will include the folding of the flag with at least 2 members of the military and the playing of taps that may be live or it could be recorded, okay? But the VA will also give you $300 burial allowance and then $780 for a plot or interment allowance if you were not buried in a VA cemetery. So a little over $1,000 can go towards your burial, your final disposition, if you have military, if you're a veteran and you qualify it for them. I know we have some questions, so
Yes.
that have been coming in. So,
Oh my goodness, so much information. Who knew there were so many steps involved in this planning process? So Robert was very intuitive and last night posted some information on his personal Facebook page about this topic. And so it generated a fair number of questions last night. Now, if you're watching with us currently live, please feel free to log in with any questions that you might have and we'll address those each as they come in. But I want to address a couple of the questions that were sent in last night. First question is, are there any fees associated with advanced planning services?
All right. Back to me, yep. All right. Yes and no. You can sit down with me free of charge and I can go over all the costs and all the wants and wishes for you and we can just leave it at that. If it is something that you choose to fund, you have a couple of options there. If you fund it, you have an option to pay it in full right then, right there, never have to worry about making another payment again, and it's covered. It draws interest, and it covers any inflation. 2, the second way you can do it is through a payment plan. You can do a 3, a 5, a 7, or a 10-year plan. The 5, 7, and 10-year plan kind of depends on the age. If you're into your mid to late 80s, you may only have the 3-year plan option. However, if you don't pay it off early, you may get hit with interest. It would be just like purchasing a car. So there would be the interest on that. So you may get caught there. But also with a payment plan, you have the option of paying it off within the first year, dollar per dollar, no interest. So yes and no to that question.
Great. So what information does someone need to bring to you at their very first meeting with you?
When you come back to see me for your first sit down, if you've pre-purchased a cemetery plot, bring it. If you are military, bring your DD-214. Any other documents, if it's for yourself that you would know, you may not need the documents, but anything like vital statistics or vital information on a parent that you come with, a lot of times it's very difficult to remember, especially if they're older in life, have a difficult remembering their father's middle name, or you may not even know your father's middle name. I have a lot of people that just come in and it's like, well, what's your father's middle name? They're like S, or your grandfather's middle name. And you need to know your mother's maiden name. You need to know the location of their birth, the city, state, county, country where they were born, their occupation. And all this information is used. It sounds kind of odd to bring that in, but all this information is used when generating the death certificate. Say your name is John Smith. There are a lot of John Smiths out there. So they want to make sure they declare John Smith, whose mother was Maria Sanchez, Sarte, deceased. They want to make sure that they're connecting the person who they have with the right person in all the government paperwork, declaring them deceased. So all that information that's kind of hard to remember at the time of death, you bring that and it makes things go a lot smoother. Social Security numbers. So many people don't know their parents' Social Security number or their spouses. A lot of people keep that private, but those are information that you also need to.
You also mentioned that I might need several copies of a death certificate. Why would I need so many copies?
All right, so death certificates. Like I said, there's $25 for the first one, $5 for each additional one. What do you need death certificates for? You would need a death certificate for any piece of property. So a house, a car, a boat, anything like that that has a title, a piece of land, you would need a death certificate for that. You would need a death certificate for each bank account that you have. If you're at one bank, you may only need one, but if you have accounts at multiple banks, you may need a death certificate for each one. If you have credit cards, the average person has 5, 6, 7 different credit cards, you'll need a death certificate for each credit card company that you have. Now, they may send it back to you, but they're going to require an original death certificate there. Insurance policy. You're going to need a death certificate to file an insurance claim. They may take a death notice from a funeral home, but usually they're going to want the official death certificate to see what that cause of death is there too. So all those things add up. You may need, I recommend people get at least 10 if they're in their 50s, 60s, 70s. If a person is starting to get up in age and has like a memory care issue and things have been taken out of their names, you're not going to need as many. So, good question.
So do you work with just certain cemeteries here locally, or can you work with cemeteries and advanced planning out of the state as well?
All right. I am only licensed in the state of Georgia, and I'm contracted with 4 funeral homes here in Savannah. The 2 Baker McCullough ones, there's one in Garden City on Highway 80 and on Hodgson Memorial. I also work with Families First on Dean Forest Road, as well as Bonaventure on Bonaventure Road. I can help people arrange and get in contact with any cemetery in the Savannah and Georgia area.
Great. Are there options to be planted as a tree?
Everyone has seen these on Facebook and news where they put a pod and the tree's kind of growing around the person. It's a great concept. However, it's not really viable because that tree is eventually going to grow into this big, enormous tree. And it's going to take up a lot of root space. So financially, that's not really a viable option. There are option B and option C though. So with option B, you can be cremated, and there are several companies out there that will sell you seedlings where you can put the cremated remains in the base and then plant the biodegradable tree urn kind of cardboard thing that it comes in, and you plant that and water it, and the tree grows around the ashes and grows. Most companies will provide you a tree that is designed to grow in this area. One of the most popular trees that they sell in this area is a ginkgo biloba tree, which is a beautiful tree if you've ever seen one. You've probably seen many, but just don't realize what it is. But you can plant it right in your backyard. No?
That's really cool. So our next question is, although I know that you work here locally for Baker McCullough, but can you also help people plan for if outside of Savannah area, like if they're making plans here and then they move, then what happens?
Okay, so what we can do, you can write your policy here in Savannah in case anything happens while you're living here. But this day and age, people are living longer and longer and longer. So if you happen to move, your prepaid funeral policy is transferable to any funeral home in the United States. So what you can do is, if you move to, say, Florida, you can just take it to the funeral home that you choose, and you'll get a change of assignment form from the company that holds the funeral policy. I'll get into that in a second. And they'll just change the assignment to the funeral home. Depending on the location of the country you move to, the funeral may be more expensive or less expensive, but with the interest that you've drawn in your account, it should cover any increase in charges there. One of the things I wanted to say is, I said policy. A prepaid funeral policy is held either in a trust or an insurance account, insurance policy. It is illegal for a funeral home to hold money for a service they have not provided yet. So they put it in an interest drawing account, and in my case, an insurance policy. That protects your money in case anything were to happen to the funeral home. It also allows you the flexibility to transfer it to other cities and other funeral homes in other states too.
That's really good information. The next question reads, what if I've entered into a payment plan and die before the end of the payment term? What happens to my prepayment?
Okay, so this is one of the big advantages of a pre-need. If you don't have the ability to pay it all off at once, or the year comes up and you don't have the ability to pay it off at the end of the year, and you just decide to let it just to continue to pay. Depending on the payment plan and the policy that we issue you, will determine what happens. Now, if you're in an automobile accident or car, but some weird accident out there and death was not expected, your funeral will be 100% covered regardless of how much you've paid into it. So, you've made 2 payments, and then you unexpectedly die in a car accident. Even though you've only paid 2 payments, your funeral's 100% covered. And say you planned a $13,000 funeral, your family just really hit the jackpot right there. Not really jackpot. That's kind of a weird way to say that. But your family is really benefiting there. Now, if for some reason you answered yes to one of the medical questions that you have, the biggest question that people answer yes to is diabetes. And they're like, yeah, do you have diabetes? Yes. So we'll issue a different policy based on whatever your medical questions, how you answer your medical questions. If you answer no to all the medical questions, 2 months down the road, you have a massive heart attack that you had never been diagnosed with a heart illness or disease prior to this, when you entered into the contract, you'll be 100% covered. If you answered yes to one of those questions, if you did a 3-year payment plan, on the first day of the second year, so in the 13th month, you would be 100% covered regardless if you hadn't paid off the policy yet and you still had 2 more years of paying on it. If you did a 5, 7, or a 10-year plan, and it would be on the first day of the 3rd year, so month 25 into it, so 2 years, you would be 100% covered regardless of how much you've paid into it. So, you're planning on paying for 10 years, but you've passed away in year 3, you would be 100% covered regardless of you paying it off.
That's great information. So you touched on this next question just a little bit, but it says, if I decide to be cremated, but I want my ashes buried, can I still do that?
All right, so I see this a lot. Back in the day, it was very, very popular for individuals to buy cemetery plots or to buy a large section of cemetery plots for their family because cremation was not that popular and everyone wanted their family surrounded by them. But this day and age, more people are leaning towards cremation for multiple reasons. But you have this plot of land which is just sitting there. So you decide that you want to be buried in your family's plot, but you aren't sure whether to be cremated or to be buried. You can be cremated, and they have what are called urn vaults, and then they have vaults that are for urns that you can buy if you want a wooden urn, or you can buy an all-in-one urn vault, which is a marble vault that can be buried right into the ground, and you can be put exactly where you would be if you were going to be in a casket, but you would just be put in an urn vault. Your cremated remains would be buried where you normally would have been buried if you were in a casket.
Okay. Our last question is a 2-part question.
Okay.
And it reads, at what age should people really begin to think about what they want when they die? And legally speaking, should that information be written down?
All right. My opinion on that is you should really start thinking about getting all of your affairs in order about the time that you start having a family. And the reason I say that, they started to mow the grass, sorry. The reason I say that is that if you have a child and you're married and you're young and you're newlyweds, if one of you unexpectedly passes away, your family has just lost 50% of its income. So having that pre-need in place, whether it's just something very basic and simple, will save your family a lot of money that will go towards their everyday living expenses, okay? So if you have a family, I think that's a great thing to go ahead and take and get in place, regardless of your age. Realistically, the average person that starts to think about this is in their 50s, 60s, 70s. Anyone that's considering retirement and they're looking at their investments, you can go ahead and pay for your funerals and get that out of the way. And that way you don't have to worry about interest taking up the rest of that money, because you want to leave whatever money that you have in an insurance policy or any investments to your family as a legacy to care for their care and their well-being after you've passed away too. So, and then writing it down, was that the other question? Mm-hmm. Absolutely, write it down. If you don't have it put down in writing, how will somebody know what your wants and wishes are? Yes, you told one person. Well, that one person may be overruled. That one person may not be the person put in responsibility of doing your final wants and wishes. So make sure that you put it down in writing. You want to put it down in writing in your advanced medical directives, and you can designate that person to be the person that makes those decisions for you. Do not put it in your will. Chances are that your will will not be read until after all of this is taken place and finished. But it's a good place to put down at the funeral home and having a copy for you You can get memorial planning guides. I have a regular one. I have one for a VA, a veteran too. You can put it down in here. Just put it down in writing somewhere what your wants and wishes are. So those family members who are responsible for making sure that your final wants and needs are met will adhere to it and know what you wanted.
That is such awesome information. Thank you so much, Robert, for being here. If you all have more questions or would like to reach out to Robert directly, if you will just you can call us here at the Edel Caregiver Institute. We'll be glad to connect you guys with Robert directly. Or Robert, just real quickly, if you want to give us your direct contact information. So if people have more questions and would really like to take advantage of the services that you offer, how can they get in touch with you?
You can get in touch with me at any of the funeral homes. I rotate between which funeral home I'm at throughout the day, but they definitely know how to get in touch with me. The easiest phone number for me to give out to you is going to be the Hodgson Memorial location of Baker McCullough. That phone number is 912-927-1999. So it's an easy phone number to remember, but once again, it's 912-927-1999. Ask for Robert, and they can get you in touch with me if I'm not there at the building.
Great. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for joining us today, and I look forward to joining you again next month.